Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Greiner, your host for today's Swine podcast. And with me today, I have Dr. Joel DeRouchey, who is a professor at Kansas State University. How are you today, Joel?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on today, Laura.
I'm glad to have you on. Joel, I know you've been on our podcast before, but sometimes we get some new audience members. So maybe just give a quick background about who you are and what you're up to these days.
Sure. Yeah, I work here in the Department of Animal Sciences and Industry at K-State on the swine extension position. I have a research and extension role. Formerly did some undergraduate teaching in the nutrition area with some of our classes, but now I like to say I focus my time with graduate students and producers. So I still get in the classroom a little bit, but less of my time is directly spent on that. And so, yeah, I just work with a group of swine nutritionists here in our department, and just work with a lot of applied research, work with not only our Kansas producers, but fortunate to be able to do commercial research in other areas of the U.S. as well. And really just our goal here is to continue to provide answers for our commercial producers as well as the allied industry.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, Joel, as you were speaking there, I was admiring your backdrop for those that are watching this through video. If not, I'll describe it to those of you that aren't able to see it. But Joel has a series of pictures in the background. Some of them are with NJSA, some with 4-Hers clearly in the show ring, and then some other pictures that look a little bit more professional. So Joel and I were visiting beforehand that, we are in that fair season and it's upon us. And rather than maybe talking about swine nutrition today, we'll talk a little bit more differently in terms of extension and those opportunities that sit out there for our young individuals. So Joel, let's just kind of jump in on that. You've got all these pictures behind you. What are your thoughts today on youth involvement in the swine industry?
Yeah, it's rather than talking about enzymes or guilt development today, Laura, we're talking about something completely different. It's an area that I feel, while I spend almost all my time in the commercial side, as well as, yourself and others that work in our profession, we certainly value and understand the importance of our youth livestock projects. And for our international listeners, I know a lot of this, as growing up or currently, you don't even have opportunities for youth from really ages 7 to 18 would be pretty typical in the U.S. Our 4-H ages to exhibit to livestock. And in the U.S., we maybe take it for granted sometimes. This has been around for decades and decades. Even, my father tells the story in northern South Dakota where he lived. His first 4-H pig that he got was a Yorkshire gilt they ordered out of the Sears Roebuck catalog, and it came out of a train from Chicago to northern South Dakota, and that started his little swine herd when he was in middle school age. And so, these have been going on a long time, and I think, in the U.S. in particular, regardless of your involvement, understand the value that it can bring and the potential for those that have that opportunity to participate. The balance of livestock sense of not only just swine, obviously here we're going to talk about, but just understanding different species and being good stock people and having a little bit of ag background, especially today. The majority of our 4-H or FFA members, aren't from production ag, right? They are maybe from a small acreage. They may not even have facilities there. We have several that live in town that have acquired or have a little piece of ground outside of town to have pigs. And in the bottom corner of I would be my left shoulder, probably the way you look right in the bottom down here, there's 8 pigs. And this is a new 3 families that started 4-H pigs this year. In my family, I have 3 kids, and they've been helping them all year. They live in town, but found a place where they could put some pigs in our county fairs in 3 weeks. And so they're getting those pigs ready. And good example of exposure to our ag industry, and specifically in the swine area, that hopefully will foster. All these are certainly not going to end up in the swine industry, but a lot understand opportunities that could be there. But if nothing else, they are more livestock smart when it comes to general conversations about food, about just ag issues in general, with other folks, in more urban areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great couple of points. And I was kind of giggling to myself because I actually was in a meeting last week where somebody's family was international and they were coming to visit, and they're going to be here for the state fair after a few weeks, and they're excited because they said that's such an American thing to do, is to go to the fair and show. And you're absolutely right. We, especially for those of us who grew up with 4-H and FFA, we tend to take those things for granted, and particularly those opportunities. What are some things, I know we always talk about the values that kids pick up with 4-H and FFA and JSA, but what are some things that you see, particularly from maybe the youth that aren't directly in a farming, business or operation at home?
Yeah, especially in this trend's been there and will continue more. Just as you point out, they may not have from a traditional or even semi-traditional ag background. Oftentimes their parents may have been from a farm, but even more and more now it's their grandparents and that were actually from the farm. The parents maybe weren't even raised, but they understood the value of that, of livestock, or 4-H is obviously way more than livestock, right? Only a small fraction of 4-H and FFA members actually exhibit livestock. But for this purpose, we'll stay focused on the livestock involved families. And really, it comes back to the opportunity to stay connected with ag. And whether this was swine or if the goat project is one that's just absolutely grown over the last 15 years. In terms of it could be anything, any of our major livestock species that they just around the animals and a lot of them, and you see it at Iowa State, we certainly see it here, is we have a large number of those that have an interest in livestock. They may think that being a veterinarian maybe is the only route in that because they're limited in scope coming through some of those programs. Even though there's lots of different exposure, they still get in their mind that maybe the veterinary side is kind of their route to be an ag, which it is for many. But then they come and once they are in a advanced degree, and whether that's at a four-year university, whether that's at a junior college, they probably start to understand the other opportunities that are involved in the ag industry. And certainly they may not all end up in livestock. There's a lot of other opportunities in ag business, ag econ, ag communications, go through the long list of horticulture, other things, but they got a little bit of a base of livestock or ag through their exposure in 4-H and FFA that opened the doors, and especially not only them, but for their parents to see what those jobs may be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the things that I sometimes struggle with a little bit, again, I had that same challenge too, coming from a show family background, is how do you make that transition a little bit if you know that you're not going to have a show animal business of your own when you leave, or maybe that will be your kind of side business. How do you help those individuals transition over to that bigger aspect of what the ag industry looks like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the ag industry is what I've seen over the last 20 years that I've been here at K-State in particular is the advancement or the opportunities of internships, the opportunities of undergraduate research, and that's across disciplines. That's just not animal science departments, that's in horticulture, agronomy, other areas. And so I think that there's so much more potential exposure versus going through, if they went on to school, whether that's a trade school, junior college, or a 4-year university, what are those jobs? And I think they're getting much more exposure through our introductory classes earlier on, through our production classes. And certainly, as we talk about the internship side, it's just phenomenal the amount of opportunities that are out there that production companies or even local businesses and local swine producers even, we probably used to term them summer help, right? Summer labor to help, which they are. But they've actually put a more professional attitude in it and a professional approach. So while it's still a summer work experience in a lot of these cases, they're also very mindful that they're just not going to encourage people to come in the industry if they come in and, all right, everybody has their list of the 5 things they don't like to do, so we're just going to give that to the intern. that rarely happens anymore. The interns and any summer work experiences get involved in all aspects so that they can see the opportunities down the line. So I think that has been probably one of the largest changes in terms of just volume of numbers of opportunities. And then I think the part that we find here in particular, I think specifically when it comes to the swine industry, is educating the parents. Right. All parents want what's best for their kids, and that hasn't changed. But I would say even more is the parents are further away from an agricultural background. If their kids are going into that field for higher education, they often do not know what these opportunities are. They just see pig industry, but they don't know the specific jobs and specifically what their son or daughter may be doing in those careers. And so I think part of this education process is so they don't discourage their son or daughter from going into these fields, but they have an understanding of how good the careers are, what the pay opportunities, what the longevity, the job satisfaction that a lot of people that are in our industry have, that their son or daughter can be part of that as well, because most of them just have no idea or very limited idea of what those opportunities are.
Mm-hmm. I think you bring up a good point. I still joke today that there are jobs I'm still learning that exist out there that, I might have thought about 10, 20 years ago. And we're not necessarily exposed to them. And you're absolutely right. So let's kind of go back to that 4-H, FFA age individual and talk about how we get that exposure early on. Because honestly, I'll tell you, growing up, the only thing I ever heard was, well, if you like animals, go be a vet. Right. And, or, be a farmer. Those are the two options you had. And obviously there was more out there even then, but, how do we help get that information to people earlier before they come to college?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things is like with the county fairs coming up is a good example. Our fair, we do a number of other educational activities. We have a skill-a-thon. So again, they're multi-species, but almost every youth 4-H member exhibiting livestock, and many that aren't, because their fellow friends grab them and, hey, we're going to do the livestock skill-a-thon. So they see different things, but in there they learn about meats, they learn about some feed ID, they learn equipment, they learn reproduction. So all these different things. And I think just underlying, while we don't get into specific jobs, they start to understand some of the different dynamics that go on with livestock in particular. Stockman contests, just kind of back to the quiz bowls. There's all of those offer some different exposure. And then as we get into the jobs more specifically, you almost have to have you have to start getting into that late middle school, probably at the earliest, get into high school. And that's where 4-H, still offers opportunities. Like in Kansas, we have a Discovery Days, and it's a 3-day event, the end of May, beginning of June on campus, where it's a lot about career exploration of different areas. You start to get into the FFA really takes hold at that point when students are enrolled in FFA. And again, it's encouraging those that, FFA, even in our chapter in 𝗹𝗵𝘁, there's about 85 students enrolled in FFA. You could probably count on a hand and a half how many are from an ag production background. Most of them are from, our town's only 4,700 people, but most of them are not from an ag background that are in the ag program in FFA. They start to see those jobs. And so I would say we almost do a little bit of a transition, and 4-H still is involved, but oftentimes we rely on the FFA side a little bit more for some of that career opportunities through those classes. And you have a little more focused time with those high school students, and then through some of their advanced leadership contests and things there too. But not that 4-H doesn't do that, because they certainly do. But really, when you get to high school, it's kind of a balance of both of those.
Mm-hmm. How about the parents? So you talked about the youth, but how about the parents? How do we help kind of share that story before they start the college exploration paths? Is there anything we can do to help the parents maybe recognize some opportunities that are out there for their son or daughter?
Yeah, and that one gets, I'll be honest, is probably more challenging. We probably have, we gear materials towards the youth, but honestly, it's as much for the parents to read that same materials that may come out on different jobs. But a lot of times the materials they're getting are from universities such as Iowa State or K-State, talking about majors, and then they list the types of jobs, but that probably still doesn't help get to the nuts and bolts of what those jobs are, right? And oftentimes it takes some being in a major or having those conversations of people they know that are in those fields. I mean, I'll be honest, right now there's probably a gap, and this is probably the same with engineering, dietetics, whatever it is. You have to know people in that field to really know what they do, or you see them in your community. And I think that's in particularly important when we start to get into the county fair side. Are the local swine producers involved? Are they helping be the superintendents? Are they in the show ring helping check in and just run a sorter board to get pigs in? And oftentimes people think that, well, what does that mean? It means that people in the field are there and present. Oftentimes it isn't maybe just the full-blown conversation, but if we don't have a presence from our swine side in local swine events, because the days, still there is counties, and certainly in Iowa and other places that still have county-based swine associations, but most of those have went away across the U.S. Again, we go back 40 years ago, almost every county, even in Kansas here, we had county swine associations. Those really don't exist anymore. We have our state associations and then the producers that are members, but even how do we have to be present. And I would say if our swine industry is present, whether they're from a farm or whether they're from an allied industry, they may work in nutrition through a local feed supplier, or they work through a commercial genetic company, equipment sales, whatever it is. If 4-H and FFA gave them an opportunity to be in a career, because it gave them a start to that, we have a lot of people that understand that and want to do that. But we also have a lot of people that don't. They stop giving of their a little limited time, and everybody's busy. But we got to understand presence is probably one of the most effective ways to encourage or to have people understand, hey, these are professionals in the field and they're here and care about my son or daughter or the youth program. I mean, I think that's as much as anything, just to get conversation started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great set of suggestions. The other thing that pops into my head a lot, because I also have a high schooler that we're going through the whole career exploration, is opportunities just to shadow people. It's hard, and you're absolutely right. A lot of it comes back to your contact, whether it's through church or a local civic group or whatever, is who you know and how you get those relationships. But I think if producers and employers could potentially open up their doors a little bit to our youth and let them shadow for a day or two here and there. Mm-hmm. Again, it's not the full career opportunity, but it at least gives them an idea of, hey, is this even something I really enjoy? And I'm missing that piece a lot. And I don't know mm-hmm. if that's something you think is feasible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, in our local community, they're between equipment dealers and they do some of that, but I don't know how many, again, if you draw the circle, both of small producers or large producers, we probably don't do a very good job of that or think about that. It's not that we're trying to ignore it. Oftentimes they don't think about maybe the value, if there is somebody interested in swine, just to come out for a day. Great, because that's what they need, is back to exposure. And we see this time and time again. And before we started this call, Lori, you talked about a student that kind of had an eye-opening experience on an internship. And we see that all the time here. Students that, again, they had some ag background. They want to potentially be an ag, probably a veterinarian, because that's their exposure or kind of what they saw as a path. They get on a commercial farm, or they get enrolled in our undergrad research class and they're doing a swine project. And all of a sudden, we have many examples of students that took that class, had no swine background, and have went through the graduate school either currently or formally and are in the swine business. And I think that's just relates to just a door open. While that was at a university setting, what would happen if that was in high school, just to start to get some of that exposure? And we have, there's lots of examples of, in our area here around Manhattan, of swine producers that hire high school students, hire college students to get some work experience, and then provides them with some valuable chore labor as well. But those are things that we have to continue to look at. And one of the limitations that some employers put in, and I wouldn't necessarily completely disagree, is just back to the biosecurity side. I know if we look at some of our production systems they don't allow their employees and then the youth to be around pigs. And I get that from a biosecurity standpoint. There's also production systems that I know that, not that they probably encourage it, but they look for people, and they have a number of production managers, wean to finish managers, growers that have 4-H animals that are involved in the National Junior Swine Association, involved in their state junior association, because they know they have the husbandry and livestock skills to be extremely good at their job in the commercial side. And so I see all sides of that, and I would not say anybody's right or wrong how they approach that. But oftentimes we, in our own ag side, we prevent those families and youth to be involved in the swine. And obviously biosecurity, number one, thing that any swine producer, commercial producer is going to have on their mind. But where we find that balance in, and then if companies do that, how are they still supporting local youth and the fairs and all the things that encourage and have them viewed as a positive light, and understand why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I wrote a little note, biosecurity, when you were talking,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously that is a concern. But I was even thinking, the local locker, how many clubs and groups have toured the local locker and talked to them about their business, and
Mm-hmm.
the local bank, if there's a lending officer there, or your USDA office. I mean, I think there's some other opportunities that maybe not necessarily on the farm that individuals can participate in and see some differences. And then, like you said, maybe it's some bigger events, those that are more concerned about biosecurity, rather than having people on their farm, can attend and participate.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my next note, actually, was how do we support as producers, as farmers, as people involved in the ag industry? What do you see are the needs for support for NJSA and 4-H and FFA?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Is it time? Is it money? What is your thought?
It depends on the goals of what that person, how they want to support. I'd say it's both, potentially, of time and resources. And I think it starts at the local level. I mean, my family, we certainly, one of the swine superintendents for our swine show at our county fair in 3 weeks. And my 2 oldest children, they're both junior superintendents and have been. So I get, they get involved and want to help others. And, and like I said, my oldest son, James, he actually just graduated. He'll be a freshman at K-State next fall. I don't know, he's helping like 15 different kids with their projects in our county this year. And Jenna's going out helping as well. And at the fair, they'll be involved. And that's really rewarding as a parent to see. But I think the impact there is they've had opportunities, not only locally, but we do state showing and at a national level as well, and get exposure. And part of that, the reason they have is because I had that background. Same with my wife. She was from a family farm, grew up showing 4-H pigs as well. And so that was something important for us. But for the other swine producers that maybe don't have grandkids or kids, showing or part of it, it's just being present. I go back to, I think it's so important that it's just being present there, and to have that conversation, to help at our 4-H fairs, to help our 4-H agents if there is some, people that are needing help with the swine projects. Because a lot of times, it's just like we had several new families in our county. They didn't know where to start. How big does the pen need to be? What do I need to get for a water? What type of feed trough, or how do I feed these pigs? What feed do I even need to get to feed? They just don't know, but they want to learn and they want to get involved. And that's where our producers, or even if they're no longer in the business, if they're, or if they're allied industry, those are easy questions that most people in the industry can help answer. Mm-hmm. And that by itself provides such gratitude that somebody spent, a lot of those conversations are 15, 20-minute conversations that they helped. And certainly from a resource standpoint of supporting local fairs, premium sales, from a national standpoint, and again, up in the top corners of my picture for those that see it, the National Junior Swine Board was 7 new members were just put in place for the National Junior Swine Association Board of Directors. And fortunately, my son James was one of those. And I know Jody Sturley's son Jackson's one currently. And, it offers a lot of opportunities, but there's a lot of state and local leadership as well. Many states have developed part of some of these show series. Again, it's back to some of the shows, but they have junior boards in Kansas. We have an Eastern Kansas swine show series, and it has a junior board we started about 7 or 8 years ago. And they take leadership at those individual events for educational activities. There is so many of those that, again, back to your question, how do people get involved? It's supporting those local leadership opportunities, because then for those that choose to go in that, they got their toe in the water, actually probably their foot by now. And now it's what opportunities in the swine industry are the next steps. Oftentimes we need the first step to get them involved. And that's where local people involved in the ag industry or swine can help with that. And then it's the next step. Hey, these pigs are pretty neat, right? They care for them. They want a little bit more. And then we can take them to the next step as they get a little older, as well as their parents, helping understand what those jobs are. But certainly I go back, it's just presence and a little bit of time makes such a huge difference for these youth, and particularly their parents, that are just so grateful that somebody will help them out, because they just oftentimes don't know if they're just getting started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great suggestions. What about our listeners who are international, right? They don't have the structured programs like the National Junior Swine Association or Future Farmers of America and 4-H. So how do they get people involved in their communities and local areas? Do you have any suggestions for them?
Yeah, I think it's really about the same. I mean, it's back to caring and back to intentional training or involvement with those youth. So if, we use the swan, the show side as a means to get exposure. And when you don't have that to get exposure, you have to develop the other ways. And so again, it's back to, is there some youth that have an interest, or families that can shadow in a swine barn, can shadow if you're in a professional, if you're a nutritionist, geneticist, equipment supplier, name the field. Are you going to do a farm visit, and can those youth, a youth or two come with you that are potentially interested? And again, it's just back to that initial, hey, these are good careers. These are jobs I've had, and let's go explore some things I do on a daily basis. So I think that doesn't change regardless where we're at. Mm-hmm. And then is it encouraging them for some additional training, and what opportunities, depending on the country they're in? Is that an advanced degree, or is there some apprenticeship programs? Is there just direct work experiences going to a farm? Helping get those doors open, because oftentimes, again, back to, you think the parents and youth that aren't involved in that industry, they don't know who to call. They don't know how to get those opportunities. So you can really be an inner, that person in between to help connect those that potentially have that interest with those that are actually have a career or have, in the field.
Mm-hmm. And I think those are some great suggestions. And even one that popped into my head was, just assigning a pig in your barn. If you have a smaller barn, just assigning a pig to a youth that's interested in, right, that's the pig they care for throughout its phase of production. And, maybe you pay the individual off at the end when the pig goes to market, you give them a portion of the earnings, or maybe you pay them regularly, or it's just experience. Yeah. But right, again, it's all about getting them in the barns and getting them comfortable with livestock, right? Whether it's pigs, cattle, whatever.
Right. And, and there is some, in the US and, have programs where they get donated a sow, a gilt, a ewe, a doe, a heifer, that one of their offspring then get donated. And it's very similar to the Heifer International program, that we use in a lot of countries for development work. It starts where somebody is given an animal, then they must donate, a reproductive female off of that, whatever species it is, to continue the chain. And those, again, if you take a step back, those are still very low cost ways to get somebody introduced to a species, to a pig or a heifer or a goat or sheep, whatever it is. And, and again, those are small investments up front. And once those kids, we always talk about what's different in 4-H and FFA about livestock projects. We talk about the work ethic, responsibility. Well, you can develop a lot of that off of any project. But the clear difference is when you have a biological animal that depends on you for food and water each day, that's a whole different mindset. Because if, at home, they're working on lots of other projects for fair, but if they didn't get their bread baked today, we probably can still do it tomorrow. Or if we don't finish a sewing project, there's still a deadline, but we can cram at the end. That pig needs to be fed and watered this morning. It needs to make sure it's done at night. So just that whole responsibility change. And when it's a live animal, that just completely shifts the mindset, which I think then on that daily basis, daily exposure, either people decide they really like it, and some decide, hey, I don't like this. And that's just as important, right? But for those that do, then we can spur them into those opportunities.
Mm-hmm. And even for those that don't, right? That's where maybe they're more in the ag business side where they're still connected, but in a different way, right? They appreciate the boots on the ground, but yet can still support and do other things. And so I agree. I think those are great opportunities and great ways to get people thinking and started down the path of livestock agriculture. Well, Joel, our time is already wrapped up. We're already out of time, and I'm not going to ask you the typical 3 questions that I ask our guest speakers, but maybe just wrap up with a couple takeaways for today's audience, just to think about and stew on, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate the value that each one of you that are listening can have in the life of spurring a potential career interest of our youth in the swine industry. Again, many of them don't have that background, but if they have, to the local county fairs that are coming up, or the different times a year that these activities are going in, supporting local 4-H clubs, supporting the FFA chapters, getting some exposure to our industry, to the youth and the parents is so important. And where does that spin off? In our current graduate program here, we have 13 graduate students. 9 of them come from some sort of livestock showing background. And that is not intentional. We don't intentionally seek those out by any means, because they're being trained in applied swine nutrition for jobs in the commercial industry. These aren't going back to raise show pigs. But it gave them an opportunity to know they wanted a career in the swine industry, and they're going to be great professionals that help all of us in our industry. And so it takes that initial step. And there's many of the listeners I know that do help in this area. If you have the opportunity, and if these youth programs gave you your advancement and interest, you got to look in the mirror and realize that you are the perfect person to help somebody else find that interest as well. We need lots of good people in our industry, and it all starts for a lot of them on our youth livestock programs.
Perfect. That was a great summary of exactly what people can do to help get involved and get our youth active and into livestock agriculture. So Joel, again, I want to thank you for your time. And again, I wish you all the best with the rest of your day and the rest of your summer, and certainly enjoy your fair time this year.
Well, you as well, Laura. Enjoy it with your children as well.
Thank you.
Imagine if, with a few key concepts, you could have the potential to create a massive positive impact by bringing from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars for swine producers. Join us on this small group and go to the next level of swine nutrition on this 7-week-long elite online training in applied swine nutrition and feeding by myself and my world-class invited speakers. Additionally, you enjoy an exclusive community to exchange ideas. Go now to www.eliteswinenutritionist.com.